his region for approval, but it will not be signed off on before he leaves. So they don't know who the new project manager will be yet. So as soon as I do, I'll keep bird dogging that.
Other questions? David?
But maybe we'll talk about this afterwards in construction projects, but are we going to hear about the boardwalk?
Sure, I can give an update.
If you want to do it now, or it's up to you.
Well, I know I wasn't at the hearing, but the Historic District voted last, I believe, Wednesday night to authorize the demolition of the existing boardwalk, not right now, but when the time comes. And that passed, and that has been appealed. So the way the appeals work with the local historic districts, it then goes to the regional commission, which is the chairperson of each town that's part of the district. And I'd have to add up on my fingers how many towns there is, but I think there's 7 or 8 roughly. And then we're going back before them shortly after Labor Day to present on the certificate of appropriateness for the actual design. And so again, we're not at construction design phase, it's more the concepts of what we're doing, and then we would come back to the selectmen to finalize that before we start filing for all the permits. But this is really the first stamp of approval we needed to finish that work.
Do we know when the regional will hear it?
No, that hasn't been scheduled yet. We'll be sure to have town council present, and we've already been preparing for it, and have a lot of examples of similar projects that have been approved in other towns in the district, in the Old Kings Highway.
I think, go ahead.
Doing good. I was going to say, I attended, I think we were all there. And just some of the comments I just want to make about that meeting. One is that, I was approached after the meeting, I got phone calls after, and still it amazes me the amount of disinformation that is out there in regards to this project. I just want to remind everybody that the town did vote to replace it. That this is not something that the 5 of us came up with behind a curtain and decided to bulldoze the boardwalk, as one person put it. That there's logistical issues, there's volunteer issues, there's prevailing wage issues, there's design issues, the ADA compliancy. I would really just urge everybody that to watch the instructional videos that we put out. The information on there is accurate. There's no fluff. There's no making stuff up. Because some of the questions or the comments that I got after were pretty disheartening and really, for me personally, angering, because I know the amount of effort that's been put in to try and put the information out there, and it's really disappointing.
Yeah, I'll add to that. Sitting through that was kind of torturous in a way. I don't know whether the public that was there understood that everything that they brought up, we had discussed here ourselves. Not putting railings on was one of the first things we asked if we could do. We looked at the historic, we asked Bud to check into the historic qualifications, which could have been an exclusion for some of these things, and they had it read to them that night that it is not historic. And it sounded like we hadn't done anything, and we had. And I think when Bobby got up and asked the engineers to come to explain the condition of the boardwalk, which again, we all kind of get a little nervous about saying this in public, but they explained it, that it was in bad shape. And I think the ultimate thing that upset me was we spent, I think, $15,000 at their request to get a historical engineer to review this project, and we got a very competent one who's did this building and others. And when he stood up and said, I didn't start out thinking we had to rip the boardwalk up, but after reviewing it, it cannot be fixed. Now, I don't know what else you can say when it comes to what's wrong with the boardwalk, but still, the emotions are so high that I guess it led to this appeal to another level, and probably could go to another one after that. But there isn't much we could do that we haven't already done as a board in reviewing all this. So it just is upsetting.
Yeah, we had a 2-hour Zoom with all the group last Friday, and then we had a 1.5-hour one today. So we're preparing a bunch of information just to try to get factual information out to the public. Trying to use some of the venues that we've used on some of our recent projects that have been successful, short videos, parts of things that people could access from social media or our website or even on SCT. So we're going to be trying to get several of those put together over the next month. So.
And I want to throw a few things here, a couple logs on the fire, but the reality is this. There is a group in town that is working very hard to spread misinformation regarding the boardwalk project. They are not putting forth the facts or the truth about the work that has been done and how we got to where we are. And that is the primary problem. And there are so many folks in this town, just go out for coffee or to a barbecue at a neighbor's house or wherever you want to go, and you will hear the piles of rumors about how we got to where we are, and they are simply untrue. The existing structure, and it's been talked about the condition of the existing structure, it is going to meet its fate one of two ways. It is either going to be condemned or a storm is going to take it away. This group, and with the support of town meeting, if you look back to town meeting made a very specific decision. At that town meeting, Mr. Snyder made a motion to separate the boardwalk from the infrastructure override, from the infrastructure debt exclusion. It failed. That is not what the people wanted us to do. And if we wanted to take a very easy path here, we could just put this project on hold and allocate those funds to the roads and go spend it on the roads and go on our way. But the reality is that this board is providing leadership in the interest of making sure that we have a structure that we can be proud of, that we have a structure that is here for a long time, and that it is rebuilt on a predictable timeline as opposed to being in an emergency reactive situation. And I know that over the past more than year, many of us have been approached and met with individuals who built the existing boardwalk. They've said all sorts of things to us about things they want to try to accomplish, but the reality is, and I think, at least I personally, I said, listen, if you can find the path, I will advocate, I will roadblock. Tell me the path to creating a structure that is as similar as what you want to what we have, that is also accessible. The accessibility is key. We have two challenges. We have a structure that's failing, and we have a structure that is inaccessible. My wife and I walked on the boardwalk last night, and I know that Mike walks on it, I think, every day. Mm-hmm. And I hadn't crossed it entirely in a little bit, but it's a bit shaky there. There's different elevations. There's things going on. And one of the most interesting things to me is I passed a group of tourists from Europe. There was 3 or 4 couples, and they looked visibly scared. And after they walked by me, I heard them say, geez, I wish this had railings.
Yeah.
It could not have been timed better. But it's important for folks to recognize all of the positive work and proactive work that has gotten us to where we are. This did not happen overnight. We have been talking about this for 3 years. As much as we have been criticized for taking too long, we're currently being criticized for going too fast. And it's a no-win situation. It's very important for folks to recognize that the height is a product of coastal zone management regulations that say that for every foot of width, we have to have 1.5 feet of height to make sure there's enough sunlight underneath for the marsh grass to grow properly. So we're running about 5 feet higher than we are today, and honestly, the existing height, the existing elevation is not that close to the marsh. It's not as close as I think people perceive it to be. But running around town spreading misinformation, carrying around pallets that are supposed to be mock-ups of a structure that doesn't even have detailed construction plans, these are things that don't make sense, and they are negative. It is negative campaigning that is in the interest of specialized interest of specific individuals. That's just what it comes down to. But at the end of the day, if you aren't advocating for this, you're advocating against accessibility for all concerned. And our job, and I know that we do it well, is to advocate and work to provide outcomes for all concerned. And providing access to that structure is critical. I don't care, folks say, I'll help people get across. It's never been that way before. That's unreasonable. Those are selfish statements. They're inappropriate. If that's how folks feel, they should go take a hard look in the mirror, because making this structure accessible is going to best serve everyone in our community and provide everybody the equity they need to get across that structure. And I'll wrap up with this. You know, the critics will say that the signs down there don't have Braille on them, that there's stairs at the end. Rome wasn't built in a day. We have a lot of work to do when it comes to accessibility in this town, but when we build new structures, when we renovate structures, we fix them, and we've been doing that, and we will do it here, and we will continue to move forward.
Speaking as a more than 60-year-old,
Is that your current category?
who does walk the boardwalk at least 4 times a day for the last 10 years, winter and all times, most of our aged people are concerned about falling, and many of us have not as much dexterity and flexibility in walking that we used to have. And I'm telling you, you go down there when there's frost on that boardwalk, and you walk through that 300-foot section that is like this, and it's dangerous. And you're absolutely right, David. I've seen tour buses pull up over there from Pennsylvania on the other side, and you don't see the whole bus going across that boardwalk. You see 1 or 2 or 3. And I think Carl Johansson said it as clear as anybody else. It eliminates access to an awful lot of people that will not cross it because of their concerns about that. And it's just too bad.
And the horror stories of the folks that have made the decision to cross and push someone across in a wheelchair that I've heard on the patio at Cafe Chew, and they have to find somebody to pick them up on the other side because they're afraid to go back.
Yeah. Yeah.
It has to be fixed.
Yeah, well, the other thing I was just going to point out too is, and because this came up in one of the conversations, this generation is probably the last generation that's going to see the wink, nod, and handshake permitting, you know, an agreement. Like when they did it in '93, there wasn't significant environmental overview. And I want everybody to understand this part too, because this ties in with the 111 study and what we're doing with the dredging of the old harbor, is that currently the salt marsh and the boardwalk is perhaps one of the most heavily surveyed pieces of land in the world right now. I mean, in all honesty. So people said, why don't we just go in and do it? Why don't we just do that? If we do something to that effect, we're also putting at risk, you know, by violating the permits and doing whatever, you know, the monies that we have coming, you know, potentially for the 111 study. And it's just, it's really frustrating because, like, to Dave's point, what I said before is the misinformation is just, it's overwhelming. And if, you know, if they actually read or called or asked, you know, we would be more than willing to say, no, this is.
And if we got out the DeLorean, you know, in 1990 is when the federal ADA law was adopted, right? And it was rebuilt in 1992. So the folks that were out there swinging hammers in 1992 missed the boat on historical, and they missed the boat on ADA then, when it probably should have been addressed at that time. However, at that time, due to the lack of enforcement of regulation in general, it was not applied in many cases where it probably should have been.
Well, we had volunteers that said they'd rebuild the destroyed boardwalk, so the town said, go for it. And they did. And it did last for 20 or 30 years. But hey.
Oh, no, just a couple things. I know, you know, building permit was issued back in 1991, I believe, and it took a while, obviously, for it to be completed. But we have to remember that the so-called archway section all had to be engineered, all had to get permits. It was a marine contractor that installed it, and that's the one support part of the whole boardwalk that is still structurally sound. And then I just wanted to reiterate that at the follow-up hearing with the Historic District for their certificate of appropriateness, they asked for a site plan, which we're working on, and for lack of a better word, a mock-up of the 3 different types of infill between where the planks would be and where the top wood railing would be. And so, you know, we're going to try to give them what they asked for. And so we're working on a mock-up of the 3 different types of infill, and we're working on the site plan. So, I mean, there's still a month to go with all that, but that's what we were asked to provide.
We have a public session coming up, but I just wanted to bring up one other point, and correct me but if I'm wrong. This project has been delayed about 18 months to 2 years, and it's been delayed because we have been willing to meet with groups that were concerned and reflect their concerns, like hiring the historic architect. I was a little taken back when someone made the remark about the terrible design with the, it is my impression that the reason the hump is in the boardwalk is that they wanted it.
I think we felt it
Yeah,
looked.
that's
it was a look that
actually,
was most-
so I have two things left on my list here, because I was trying to get, but that was one of them. We put the arch back on the bridge for them, is my understanding. But if you go back, and if we want to talk about history,
It's flat.
I went and found all sort of pictures from the archives. Mike, you probably might have been there. But it was flat.
It's flat.
It was flat, and it could be flat again. But to that end, no one is trying to prevent the ability to jump from the structure. That is not on the agenda anywhere. If anything, we've had extended